Well, good evening and welcome to our Lenten Studies, Surveying the Cross in Song, Week 2. I'm so grateful that you have chosen to be part of this Lenten discipline and journey, and I continue to pray that it will impact your life profoundly. And consequently, the lives of other people, because if your life is impacted with and by the Spirit and through His Word, then others inevitably will be as well. Let's begin with a word of prayer. Loving God, we thank you that you love us so much as we are, but too much to leave us that way. May this Lenten study draw us ever deeper into your heart, that we might reflect you, that we might love you more profoundly and reflect that love more clearly in the world around us, that others may know the hope that we have in you. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, I had a bit of response to the questions, so I just want to get right into that before we go any further. If you see me looking this way, I'm looking at Patricia. She's probably going to be mad at me for saying that, but she's there. Thank you to Walt Wager as well for filming this and doing all that he does for us in these studies and on Sunday mornings as well. We're so grateful to you, Walt, for that. So I'm going to read the question and talk a little bit about the responses. So question 1, both Isaac Watts and Pope Gregory shared a common concern around church music that ultimately led to a positive transformation of worship in the church. As we survey the wondrous cross this Lenten season, we, like Watts suggests in this hymn, may well see some areas in our own lives that could be a cause for concern. And I have written down, for example, pride and vanity, and you fill in the blank, because you know yourself better than anyone. Perhaps we could name just one area of concern in our lives that we feel needs to be sacrificed to His blood, and we hear that at the end of verse 2 in the hymn. So you'll remember that the hymn was, of course, When I Survey the Wondrous Cross. So we're sort of jumping off that hymn and into the questions. And one person in response to verse 1 said, in terms of sacrificing to His blood, this person recognizes a sense of entitlement in his life. He's sort of struggled with that through his life, but God has really helped him to deal with it, but yet he says there still remains a trace of that entitlement attitude, that I'm entitled to have what I have. And so he says that for me is something that needs to be sacrificed to the blood, to the lordship of Jesus Christ. And that's what we're really saying when we talk about sacrificing something to the blood of Christ. We're saying, because life is in the blood, and we're saying that we're sacrificing that, whatever it is, to Christ and His life and love, so that His life and love will in turn become the dominant thing in our lives, and even eliminate that trace that this individual talks about. In verse 3, we're made to understand, this is question 2, Christ's death on the cross as the greatest expression of God's concern for our human condition and His desire for that condition, which is sin and separation from Him, to be bridged by His love. This love is more than a mere sentiment expressed in a card or a quickly spoken word, but rather an intentional act done by Christ for the salvation of all humanity. Question is, in what ways might we imagine showing our love for others in ways that are meaningful and intentional? One person said that Jesus gives us 2 commandments, love God and love each other. He says, simple, right? Wrong. he talks about that for him, an answer to this question, a meaningful and intentional act, is treating everyone the way we would want to be treated. Looking at our neighbor as a child of God and not just another person that we have issues with. And I think that's really a profound response to that question. Treating everyone the way we would want to be treated is an incredible way of showing our love for others in a way that's meaningful and intentional, because it means that we're going to stop and step back and take a sober second thought, as a friend of mine used to say, and ask ourselves, wait a second, how would I want to be treated in this particular situation? And you fill in the blank with whatever's going on in your life. How would I want to be treated? So it makes us stop, it makes us contemplate, it makes us ask God, God, help me to know how you would respond in this situation. And then we respond out of love for God and that person rather than out of our own brokenness. So thank you, that's a very good response. And then the final line of the hymn reads, love so amazing, so divine, demands my soul, my life, my all. And the question is, what are some possible first steps to giving all of our lives to the purpose of knowing Christ's love more fully and sharing that love with others? We hear that a lot. God, I want to know you and make you known. And it becomes kind of a bit of a catchphrase in the church. But knowing Christ more and making him known is easier said than done. One person says, I talk too much to God. I think sometimes I'm guilty of that as well. I have this list of things that I want to talk to God about, and people I want to talk to God about. And I think I share that condition with this individual. This person says, I talk too much. I think I ought to, well, I'm not going to say, they're saying basically the old adage, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, and therefore we should listen twice as much as we speak. And he talks about prayer and meditation being first steps, thinking less of myself and more of others. And that when we do that, when we listen to God, we become more and more consumed by him and his love for us. And that shapes and molds us into the people he wants us to be. Then we start to respond to others and treat them again with a love that flows from God's heart through ours. And that's a love that impacts and changes people's lives. It's a love, by the way, that's attractional. When people see that kind of love flowing in and through your life, they're attracted to you. They know there's something going on in your life that's different, and they're going to want that. They're going to want to know more about that. So very good response. A couple of other things I wanted to share that people had shared with me, because Isaac Watts talked about the music of his day needing work. And this person said they hadn't really thought about a time when music needed work. So that's a really good thought too, that out of these studies we look at both the narrative around the hymn and the person's life. We look at the words of the hymn itself, and all those things challenge us. And this person was challenged by the idea that music needed work. And I guess maybe the question comes out of that is, what music need? How does the music need work? Maybe it's not the music, maybe it's the heart that's singing the music sometimes that needs the work. But maybe we need to ask God, what is it we need to do? What song do we need to sing to connect better with you and your love? So it's an interesting thought. And then another person, I really like this response, mentioned that Isaac Watts, she looked up Isaac Watts and some of the hymns that he had written, and realized that he had also written, "O God, our help in ages past," which is number 680 in our hymn book, by the way, and that was one of this person's favorite hymns. And I love the fact that that hymn became a jumping off point for her to explore other hymns by that author, which is another good idea. You know, there's a wealth of hymns and inspiration to be found as we do a little more research. So I'm glad to know that people are thinking about the questions. I'm glad to know that you're doing more research as we go on in this study. So thank you for those responses. I'm really blessed by those. And we're going now to get into our study for today, week 2. Just give me one quick second here. Perfect. So this is, again, probably one of my favorite hymns, particularly this time of year, "Beneath the Cross of Jesus." Because wherever our lives need to go, they need to go to the cross. Always. Always. So I want us to take a moment now and sing this hymn, and then we'll take a look at the narrative around it. "Beneath the Cross of Jesus." Beneath the cross of Jesus, I fain would take my stand. The shadow of a mighty rock within a weary land, a home within the wilderness, a rest upon the way. From the burning of the noontide heat and the burden of the day, upon the cross of Jesus, mine eyes at times can see the very dying form of one who suffered there for me. And from my smitten heart with tears to wonders I confess the wonders of redeeming love and my unworthiness. I take, O cross, thy shadow for my abiding place. High as no other sunshine than the sunshine of his grace. Content to let my pride go by, to know nor gain nor loss, my sinful self, my only shame, my glory, all the cross. That wonderful hymn was written by Elizabeth C. Clephane, who dates 1830 to 1869. So she died at the age of 39. The composer was Frederick C. Maker, 1844 to 1927. The tune name is St. Christopher. The scripture reference is taken from Isaiah 32 and 2. Isaiah 32, verse 2. And I'm just going to read that. I'm going to read verse 1 and 2, actually. See, a king will reign in righteousness, and rulers will rule with justice. Each one will be like a shelter from the wind and a refuge from the storm, like streams of water in the desert, and the shadow of a great rock in a thirsty land. If you look at the words of that hymn and read that verse, you'll see how Elizabeth got her inspiration so profoundly from those verses. This is a passage that's signaling to Israel the coming of the Messianic age fulfilled in Jesus Christ. And so therefore, of course, her recognition that that Messianic age was ultimately fulfilled in the cross of Christ. And for us, it's realized as we come to that place beneath the cross and accept the benefits of his passion. Another verse is 1 Corinthians 1 and 18. For the preaching of the cross is to them that perish foolishness, but unto us which are saved, it is the power of God. It seems like the first day on my new lips. I apologize for that. But anyway, the interesting thing about this New Testament passage is this first verse of our New Testament passage in our lectionary readings for Sunday. So I think it's kind of interesting how those things kind of dovetailed so nicely. I'm particularly excited about this week's hymn as it comes from an author who, despite her personal challenges, succeeded to fulfill God's call on her life and contribute profoundly to the work of the kingdom. What an inspiration she is. This meaningful hymn was written by a frail Scottish Presbyterian woman of the past century, actually the 19th century, who, despite her physical frailties, was known throughout her community for her helpful and cheery nature. Elizabeth Cecilia Douglas Clephane, one of the few women hymn writers of Scotland, was born in Edinburgh, Scotland, but grew up in Melrose, Scotland, in the lovely area of Abbotsford, near the old bridge described by the well-known Scottish writer Sir Walter Scott in his book, The Abbot and the Monastery. Her father was a county sheriff, her mother a descendant of the famous Douglas family, very prominent family in that day. Elizabeth was one of 3 sisters, but she was known as the delicate, retiring member of the family. Yet within the limits of her strength, she served the poor and sick of her community. And she and her sisters gave to charity all they did not actually require for their daily needs. Throughout the Melrose area, Elizabeth was affectionately known to the townspeople as the Sunbeam. Elizabeth enjoyed writing poems and had several published in a Scottish Presbyterian magazine called The Family Treasury. However, the majority of her writings appeared anonymously in this magazine in 1872, 3 years after her early death, again at the age of 39. Beneath the Cross of Jesus was written by Miss Clephane in 1968, 1 year before her death. It was not published, however, until 1872, when it appeared anonymously in the family treasury with several of her other poems. The original poem consisted of 5 stanzas, but today only 3 are used in most hymnals. It is obvious that Elizabeth, like most Scottish Presbyterians of her day, was an ardent Bible scholar, or student rather, for her hymn is replete with biblical symbolisms and imagery. For example, in stanza 1, the reference to the mighty rock is taken from Isaiah 32, verse 2. The reference to the weary land is taken from Psalm 63, 1. The reference to home within the wilderness is taken from Jeremiah chapter 9, verse 2. The reference to rest upon the way is taken from Isaiah 28, verse 12. The reference to noontide heat is taken from Isaiah chapter 4, verse 6. And finally, the reference to burden of the day is taken from Matthew 11, verse 30. That's where Jesus says, "Come to me, you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. The tune for this text, named St. Christopher, etymologically means bearer of Christ. It was composed for this text by Frederick Charles Maker, one of the outstanding organists in the English nonconformist churches of that day. Maker was born in Bristol, England, and he spent his entire active life playing in the various churches of that day, of that city, rather. Frederick Maker contributed a number of hymn tunes to the 1881 edition of a hymnal called the Bristol Tune Book. Amazing sense of how God used two people in such powerful and inspirational ways. One a composer of music, one a composer of poetry, so beautifully dovetailed together. The questions this week are, number one, as I contemplate Elizabeth Clefane's life of creativity and humble service in her community, I'm drawn to the gospel reading for Ash Wednesday, Matthew 6, verses 1 to 6 and 16 to 21. You can look up those verses when we're done today. That's where Jesus talks about praying and fasting and giving and where we lay up our treasure. Is it in heaven or on earth? So read this passage and see if you can detect how Elizabeth might have resolved to live into those verses. And how might we be challenged by her life? I was challenged when I learned of her delicate condition, and yet she did not let that stop her. She did exactly what she felt God was calling her to do in composing hymns and working on behalf of the disenfranchised, on behalf of those in need. So how might we be challenged by Elizabeth's life? The second question, in verse 1 of the hymn, we read the words, "Beneath the cross of Jesus, I fain would take my stand." In other words, I would gladly take my stand beneath the cross of Christ with pleasure. What does it mean for you to gladly take your stand beneath the cross of Christ? Again, what does it mean for you to gladly take your stand beneath the cross of Christ? I think that's a question. I don't even want to elaborate on that too much. I want us to really take time this week and think about what it means to take our stand beneath the cross of Jesus. What is it about what Christ did on the cross that makes us gladly want to be there? It's an interesting, here I just said I wasn't going to say much, but I'm going to say something quickly. It's an interesting juxtaposition that a man dying on the cross, Christ dying on the cross, is a place where we would gladly want to be. Let's think about that. And finally this week, the last two lines of verse 2 read, "And from my smitten heart with tears to wonders I confess, the wonders of his glorious love and my own worthlessness." It's my sense that Elizabeth didn't think of herself as worthless before God, but rather that she felt she didn't deserve his love due to anything that she did or any virtue she possessed. I want to ask you, what is it about God's glorious love that puts us in a position to receive it? What is it about God's love that puts us in a position to receive it? I'm really not going to say any more about that question, because I think it's something we really need to think about if the miracle of the resurrection is going to profoundly impact us at all. Friends, thank you so much for joining us this week. Profound blessings on you and your families. We will see you next week. God bless you.